So, in our first lecture, we have delineated and discussed how to situate Thomas Hobbes in the tradition of political thought. The importance of Thomas Hobbes in the traditions of political thought, how he is at the threshold of medieval and modern political thinking, and also few important registers of the Hobbesian kind of thinking. Now, here I shall begin from the point where I had left. Let us sort of utter or pronounce or repeat the paradigmatic plan of Hobbes. I mean the steps which he pursues in order to arrive at the point where he wants to. 1. The beginning of civil society or society is from mutual fear. Not companionship, not love or friendship, not what you call the social support of gathering by which individuals support or help each other. The point is mutual fear, which elicits all of us, elicits companionship, a very pragmatic arrangement amongst all of us to come together and generate a situation where we all help each other by transferring some of our rights to each other as well as to the common power. Now, there is a debate here. The debate is this. It would be interesting to know this debate. This is an objection as to whether Hobbes actually argues that there are two kinds of contract happening here. We have discussed as to the point where people come together, decide on mutual security and transfer some of their right to a common power, to a ruler who will rule over us. And if he does not do so, if he does not provide us security, then we shall not be obedient to that kind of power. Fine. But the objection is, and the argument and the debate is this. This is not only to transfer our power to a common power. I mean to relinquish, to transfer some of our rights, by which our rights become limited and not absolute, to a sovereign power, to a ruler. Not only that. The question is, unless we transfer some of our rights to each other, unless we limit each other, if our rights do not become limited, then the security will not happen. It is not within the power or within the capacity of the sovereign author, the sovereign ruler, the absolute sovereign ruler, to provide us with security if there is no concord. Hobbes actually uses the word concord, C-O-N-C-O-R-D. Concord among the fellow men, among the fellow contractarians, those who are accomplishing the contract. The point is, I mean, we could, elaborate and simplify this. Suppose that we are again, to get back to the image of the game of the football, we are to sort of, play football or a game of chess or whatever. We shall have a referee. And you can have a third referee as well. Though in Hobbes there is no provision for a third referee. You can have a referee who will, be vigilant and will exercise his rule in order to get the game going. Okay. But the point is, it's not only that the powers are transferred to a ruler or to an absolute referee. The question is not simply this. The question is, if there is no agreement between us by which we decide to limit each other, then we cannot be limited by the absolute authority. So the debate is whether there are two contracts happening. One is among us, and then between us and the ruler. But this debate which has generated a huge literature and has also sort of gave rise to two types of traditions of contract. One is the contractual tradition, which is the most popular one. And another is a contractarian tradition. And there is a big debate in the West, which is still going on, whether to place Hobbes in the contractual tradition or in the contractarian tradition, whether two moments of contract or there is a single moment of contract. The second step of Thomas Hobbes is that men by nature are all equal. This is essentially important. I mean, equality of men is not because equal in the eyes of God. Hobbes is not here appealing to a divine nature or to a divine authority. But he says, men by nature are all equal. Here is an appeal to the natural state of mankind rather than, appeal to a divine authority. Fine? This is the second step. Third, even though we are all equal, because we are led by our regions and goods are scarce, there is competition, there is destruction, and there is also a hankering or a hunt for glory, fame or reputation that we have discussed. This is the third point. This is, in Hobbes' own language, the will of mischieving. The will of mischief. As we said, that in Hobbes, man is the nasty and a dangerous kind of animal. Because he is nasty and dangerous, he always is unto playing mischief, And the point is how he is to be tamed or normalized, how he is supposed to be controlled. As we have gained, he can be controlled by a contract. In order to make all of us secure, we have to transfer some of our rights to an absolute ruler, to a ruler. By nature, of course, men have equal right to all things. But this equal right to all things, if allowed, will lead to anarchy and disorder. I quote Hobbes here. The right which all men have to all things is unprofitable. Some rights should be transferred or relinquished. The state of men without civil society is a mere state of war. That we have discussed. But here we are trying to refer to Hobbes' original words. War is an adversary to man's preservation. Again, Hobbes is saying this. There were arguments, there still are arguments, that war preserves humankind. There are arguments, strange kinds of war, that war is the beginning of peace, or the end of peace is war. So in Hobbes, this is not taken, or this is not granted. Now, the point is, as we have appealed, that Hobbes was trying to ground his argument, this self-preservation, this region from nature, in an argument which is natural law, which is natural legal, right? Nature dictates the seeking after peace. That we are hankering for peace, for our security. One might say, because we are in a society, we are hankering for security. Hobbes' argument is simply not this. Hobbes is arguing that this hankering for security derives from nature itself. And this is very significant. I think, not to be simplistic, we have to get this right inside our mind. Hobbes is saying, of course, that laws of nature are silent in nature. What does it mean? There are natural laws, there are natural reason, which is understood by human beings who come into a contract and relegate some of his or her rights to a common ruler. That's fine. But suppose, if we are to say, or if we were to say, that we shall accomplish this contract in the state of, in nature itself. To take a very sort of gross and bad example, suppose we are in a jungle and people say, come on, we'll sit together under a tree and we'll decide that somebody will be the ruler and he will give us security, we'll have these rules. Would it happen actually? Hobbes is saying that in a state of nature, natural laws are silent. Nature then, though self-preservation, fine, destruction, not fine at all. But perhaps there is a sense in Hobbes that nature is neutral to either this kind of normative value-based assumptions of destruction, creation, self-preservation, security. Nature is neutral and indifferent. Nature is forgetful. I mean, from nature then, you cannot derive these assumptions in the way we want to. Then what is required? Hobbes requires that we have to have a society. Society means, in Hobbes, a civil society. Now, civil society in today's language stands for a bit different thing than what actually Hobbes meant. In today's parlance, the way we understand civil society is a society in which citizens are there and citizens have certain rights, right? But civil society in Hobbes is used, though there are points by which this could be argued that today's civil society, the sense of today's civil society is available in Hobbes. But Hobbes is using civil society in a bit ancient sense, or a bit medieval sense, or in a bit, pre-modern sense. So when Hobbes is using the word civil, he is using it in a bit social sense and not in a very political sense. And this is very significant, because what Hobbes is trying to arrive at, that by transferring our rights to a common power, this is the commonwealth, achieved by common will. Commonwealth and common will, these are very significant, resonating, very poetic expressions deployed by Hobbes. In fact, we were discussing the first lecture that modern political thinking uses the word state. Hobbes often uses the word commonwealth to designate what we understand today by state. So by common will, certain rights are transferred to the commonwealth, to a common power. Okay? Now this is peculiar. I mean, if you look at in Hobbes, look at in the way Hobbes tries to look at and tries to theorize is strange, because this would say, I mean, there are so many persons and they're transferring their power, certain rights, to one person. This in Hobbes is a civil person. I mean, for instance, obviously, if you have a ruler, he's a civil person. And who is the civil person? This is the sovereign. This is the ruler. For Hobbes, the civil person are of two types. One is paternal and there is political. To understand what is civil person is to get to the root of these two examples deployed by Hobbes. For instance, what is a paternal civil person? Say, for instance, a father. Now, a father has natural rights over, or a mother. Father would be very patriarchal. Father or a mother, I mean the parents. They as if have a natural right over their siblings, sons or daughters. They have a natural right. They are obedient to their parents. And what do parents do? They look after the security and the future, their productive prospect of their siblings, their sons and daughters. From here, as if Hobbes derives the force of the political civil person, the commonwealth, the ruler. Here, he looks after his or her subjects. He looks after their security and in turn achieves or gains obedience. But there's a difference here. If you say that children obey parents because there was a contract between parents and children by which children have granted a transfer of their rights to parents, this is not necessarily right. This, in the case of a paternal civil person, the contract as if happens naturally. Right? But the political civil person by which we are supposed to be looked after by the ruler is not so natural. There's a civil process to it by which this contract had happened. Now here, certain objections have been raised. And these objections, though very trivial, but significant. And we shall not deliberate much on this, but keep this in mind to explore this objection further in future. The question is, if the political civil person derives his force by a contract, by a social civil form of contract, and by a paternal civil person who gains a kind of dominion naturally, what is the relation? Is the ruler father to us, or he rules like a father? In fact, this is historically true, as we discussed in the first lecture. For instance, when the British came here, and we were, as you know, colonized, they gave such a paternal argument. Paternal argument was this, of a paternal civil person, that we people were backward and savages, natives. We didn't know civilization or what is civility. So they will, for our welfare, like the parents do for their children, they will sort of, explore and grant what is good for us. We'll offer that good. We don't understand what is good for, like children don't. So the kind of distinction that Hobbes is making, and in 17th century he is making this, right? This might seem ordinary now, but in 17th century he is making this distinction between a paternal civil person and a political civil person, which is absolutely crucial in these days of colonialism and neo-colonialism. The point is, when we use or deploy or designate these phrases like paternal welfare, paternal civil person, we generally don't, inquire into the historical origins or usage of these phrases. If we had done so, then we'll know many of these usages derive from Hobbes. So it's clear, there's a common will by which certain rights are transferred to the commonwealth or the state or the ruler. And this ruler is not an impersonal, objective-like entity. It's not a chair. The way we today understand, in an office or in a parliament, we don't really refer to a particular person who is the president or the prime minister. But in Hobbes' time, this was very important, which actually derived from medieval notions of, Roman law particularly, and German, classical German legal theory. This one is the civil person. Now Hobbes is arguing, and he makes a point, that this is the artificial person. This is the Leviathan. Leviathan is basically, a sea monster. Leviathan is a sea monster who is huge and grasps everything. There was another book of of course of Hobbes, but it was challenged in a different way. Behemoth, who is a land monster. Now, this Leviathan or land monster has been described to, pin down Hobbes to a particular notion of the state. A state is like a monster. This notion is basically, originally it belongs to Hobbes. The state is a Leviathan. That means it's a monster. Why is it a monster? Because see, we have come together, all our subjects, we have transferred our rights to a civil person. We have transferred our rights to this artificial person. And so, he is all persons united in one. He is a dangerous thing, he is a monster. And that is why people argue, when governments can go, people can be destroyed, but the state remains. The state is such a transcendental, such a high-flying kind of monster. It's absolute. Now, this monster, this Leviathan, is the central metaphor, central image of Hobbes. Now, the moment we arrive at this point, a question is evident. I mean, does Hobbes then, sort of glorify and grant to the state a kind of power that is not only divine. I mean, previously king would say, I'm appointed by God, or I represent God, I have divine authority, and I'm king by divine right. That was the ancient or medieval kind of stuff. But here not God. Here not God. In Hobbes, you have the image of a monster, the large monster. Now, as we were saying, I mean, Hobbes is relevant to even contemporary, to our own times, and all kinds of political happenings. One might say, what is this image of the monster? How is it relevant? This is relevant in the sense, one who tries to resist the state. If you try to struggle with a government, today you can form a political party and you can have support. Many things, I mean, you can be successful in a sense. But government is one thing. Governments can come and go, but the state goes on forever. Why? Because the state, according to this Hobbesian logic, is established by an original contract. That cannot be abolished. I mean, if you try to abolish that, then you are not anti-political in any sense. You are anti-social. Right? You are not trying to abolish, you are not trying to counter a particular form of, political contract or political policy today. But you are trying to abolish a social contract if you try to destroy the state. Now, how to destroy a state in a very productive manner, that you shall later study when you study Marx. Apart from these debates, the point is there is a large monster who is supervising these deaths, this destruction, and trying to impose upon us that this is not the way. Why this destruction is happening? Let us come together. I mean, when we say that everything today can be discussed while we sit at the table and discuss, even from Hobbes' original argument, this can be derived. Because in ancient times or medieval times, princes didn't lay claim to power. They exercised it. Law was not a matter of private opinion but punishment. But today, we have to, renew this contract again and again through discussion, through, correcting a lot of its errors. And then we can achieve what our contract is. And Hobbes says, therefore, that contract is not enough, but there should be a concord. There should be an agreement. And this agreement can be achieved only through dialogue or discussion, though Hobbes didn't specifically mention it. But we can still derive from Hobbes our point in trying to achieve an agreement before we achieve a contract. And the veritable image of the monster or the devil keeps a vigil or supervises these attempts to strike an agreement or to establish a contract. Thank you.